A priest, a rabbi, and an American walk into a bar. Now, I want you to think about the image that came to your head when I said those words. What was going on in here? Did you picture the priest? I assume he was male. Dressed in black? How about the rabbi? Probably male again. But really what I want to talk to you about is that third person, that American. What did that American look like? And I'm going to see if I can't change that by the end of this 13-minute talk. See, this is why mass media matters. When radio came out, it allowed people to realize that their circle of people that they were like was bigger than simply the neighborhood they lived in or the community in which they spent their time. And when we added visuals to this, with the advent of television, we gathered around it together, we were able to see we were participating in a worldwide community with people whose stories mattered because they reflected ours, and in some ways they altered and improved our own stories. You see, stories and the stories we engage with affect our ability to manipulate and understand our own reality. And the accuracy of those stories influences the ways we behave in the real world. Now, this is really important. You may be familiar with this, but there was a study done about the people who watched the show Friends and what they thought was realistic in terms of a person living in the city of New York. And suffice it to say, the people who watched Friends were very wrong. Because you see, Monica's loft apartment is a $2 million property in New York. It's not something that everyday people can aspire to or afford. But if you think that people in New York live that way on a normal basis, of course it influences what you think these people are like and how you alter your own reality. This is important because our story, my story, your story, influences the ability and our ability to manipulate and interact with the reality with which we exist. Now, why does this particularly matter now? I think it matters a great deal because more and more of us are cutting the cord in broadcast television, listening to things live, and listening to them at the same time. It's been widely stated that Seinfeld was our last water cooler show, and in some ways that's true. It's the last show we were watching where you knew that I was watching it at the same time and we could interact and talk about last night's episode together. That's not the world we're living in now. If any of you have seen the great HBO series 6 Feet Under, which I finished years ago, you might be just starting. You might be in episode 2 of season 1. It influences our ability to share those stories, to connect, and to adhere to what we think our sense of reality is, which is changing. The point I'm making is these stories matter. Our shared story is what allows us to interact with together and, frankly, to care about one another. I've been thinking about that lately because I've been thinking about the stories we tell about generations. What does my generation think of yours? What does the last generation think of mine? Now, for the purposes of this quick talk, I want to mention that I'm using the Pew Research definition of generations. And what that basically means for today's talk, what's important is that millennials are ending at about the age of 16 now, and Gen Z is 15 and below. I like the Pew Research definition, by the way, because it makes me what I feel like, which is an old Gen Xer, not a young boomer. So ask yourself, millennials are at this sort of forefront of what's going on exciting in my world of marketing and advertising. For those of you who are millennials, or probably in the room for the people who aren't millennials in this room, I want you to ask yourself, what story do you tell yourself about millennials? This is one of the most studied and influential generations in the world. But we shorthand it. We tell ourselves stories. Some of those stories are not necessarily positive, but we tell ourselves stories about how we interact with these people. People in my Gen X generation tend to see millennials this way. We see them as always on their phone, never in the moment, never paying attention to what's going on around them. But of course, the millennials in this room would look at this very same image and go, well, that's close, but the experience that I have is a little more like this. It's a participatory experience, engaged. We're simply sharing with one another. And those are important distinctions. Because for the most part, if you sum up all the millennial studies that have been done, you'll find that these 5 things are true. Millennials are more participatory than generations that preceded them. They share all the time. They live in a world without boundaries where they spontaneously interact with it. And they're nonlinear. They don't have the, work the same career and get your pension path that some previous generations thought were possible. But I'm not here to talk about millennials, because it's not what's keeping me up at night. What's keeping me up at night is Gen Z. I've been thinking about what happens after millennials. In some ways, if you think about millennials, it is simply some of the experiences that Gen X was having, and then you add smartphone technology to it. My generation was feeling free, connected, resistant, rebellious, and angry. And if you add technology to that, it sort of leads directly to the image and the ideals of the millennial generation. And again, the thing that's keeping me up at night is, what happens with Gen Z? Where do these evolve? I can't predict the technology that will, my generation had internet, millennials had smartphones. What does Gen Z have? I don't know. But I'm starting to think about, where do these attitudes go? What's next behind this? And I think to think about that, you have to think about the world they will inherit and how different it will be than even a couple generations ago. So let's start by talking about their individual makeup. When I completed my first census form, it was very easy for me to check boxes that read things like Caucasian. That's very, very different now. First of all, there's 37% and growing minority population in this country. We are moving to where there is a majority minority. That's relatively linear. We sort of understand that. But where it gets more complicated is that 6.9% of us are of mixed race. And this number is growing at a far greater rate than some of the other numbers. So I don't think these people are going to find it as easy to check off a box, and it may not be as easy to understand the background of your neighbor, your community, your friends and family. Then think about the communities you're growing up in, the household makeup the Gen Z will be experiencing. Women are having babies much, much older than they ever have in the past, fueled by technology that's going on in the medical field. This is a radical change where women older and older and older are seeing rising birth rates, something that hasn't existed in human society since it has been walking upright. And women, and we assume men, are getting married older. Okay? That is a trend that shows no sign of abating and started actually back in the 1950s. So think about what a household looks like in this world. Maybe people of mixed race. You might have a father and mother. You might have only a father, only a mother. You might have two mothers. You might have two fathers. And suffice it to say, 2.4 children is not going to be the moniker that we're going to be sort of talking about in the future. Think about the faith these folks are going to be brought up in. The millennials are some of the least religiously engaged generation of all time. Why? Because it appears that mainstream religion does not really meet the needs of millennials. And this is keeping mainstream religions up at night, and it probably should be. Now, I'm not here to tell you that churches are going to sit empty anytime soon. All I'm saying is, much like the bowling alone phenomenon, this is one more place we had to share stories that's decreasing in membership and maybe decreasing our engagement with our friends, our neighbors, our communities. Let's talk finally about jobs and careers. And this one might be a little nerve-wracking. My generation and previous generation have left some of the people in this room one of the most unfortunate job situations that this country has ever faced. That is not new. And it's, of course, particularly troubling to be talking at a college and admitting that my generation has left a lot of the people in this room probably saddled with more college debt than any generation that preceded him. And that's a tsunami. That makes things very, very difficult. Not so long ago, one generation ago, when I grew up and I graduated from college, I was basically guaranteed a job. Those days are over. That makes me think about the gig economy in a brand new way. The marketer in me wants to think of these technologies and these services as part of that cool, hip innovation thing that we're all going through, and isn't it great where our society is going? But when I think about that economy, I'm not sure these are cool and exciting. These might be a practical reaction to what's going on. What I'm getting at here is that I'm not sure that keeping up with the Joneses is what Gen Z is going to experience, primarily because I don't know if they're going to have very much in common with the Joneses who live next door. Those community bonds are going away, and those understanding bonds are going away. I believe we have to figure out a way to secure them again. And Facebook isn't the solution to that problem. If you think it's a problem keeping up with the Joneses when you think it's Phoebe from Friends, wait till you try to keep up with the people on Facebook. It's practically impossible. My point is, our story is what we make of it. And we're getting to a point where other stories may not matter as much as they did anymore because we may think, as Gen Zers, that we have less in common with the people around us. We may feel a little alone. And we may feel like there's no Joneses and no normal. There's no standard by which we're measuring our behavior, our success, our social circle versus everyone else or with everybody else. Growing up in a world with no normal might be a very scary place. It's a place with no story, which is why I'm starting to think of Gen Z as potentially the story-free generation, a generation that is very self-directed, a generation that lives publicly, openly, judgment-free. Those are the good things. But the downside is might be forced, in reality, to become a little bit selfish. There are signs this is happening. Facebook is measuring that people are posting less about their personal experiences, less and less and less and less. And that's not just because people are going to Snapchat rather than Facebook. It's happening across all social media, that there seems to be a sign that people are sharing more things, but maybe less about themselves, and even less that's true about themselves. In what I consider the most depressing data point about this, The Guardian in the UK has studied UK teenagers and older and realized that the clubbing community is actually going away. People are staying in their homes rather than going out and interacting with people that they want to interact with. Netflix and chill isn't just a funny phrase, it might be a scary phenomenon. Now, the question you may be asking yourself, and it's the one I'm asking myself, is this good or bad? If the theory that I've put forward today of the story-free generation having less bonds with the people who live next to and around them is true, is that good or bad? I'll suggest two scenarios. Let's first take the pessimistic view. I lived through the 80s. I remember the 80s all too well, and I know what happens when people get too individualistic, and I'm not looking forward to going back there again. There are signs this could be happening again. The promposal, something that didn't exist a few years ago, which simply used to be a person asking another person out to the prom, now costs American consumers on average $324. Now, I would suggest to you this might suggest that we're using money to replace a personal interaction. I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist, and I'd like to show you what the other view is. Imagine what it would be like to grow up in a story-free reality, a world where you're allowed to be who you want to be at every step of the way, to pursue your art, your dream, and your voice in the way you find possible. This is what I'd like to enable. Now, I know I might be wrong. This is a theory. That's the great thing about talking about Gen Z. You can be equally as wrong as anyone else at this point. But there are some things I'd like to sort of see this society start to engage in a conversation about, just in case I am right. And I do have to warn you, I'm from Vermont, and I don't think anybody would be terribly surprised what angle some of these come from. The first thing I think we need to do is reinstitute civics as a class in all high schools across the country immediately. We have to engage our citizenry and have them help them understand why being a citizen is important and why they have obligations bigger than themselves. I'd like to see the American public get into a conversation about how we shouldn't be privatizing everything, including fire departments. Literally, buildings are burning down in this country because we don't have a government service we used to. I think the belief that all governments are bad, all governmental services are bad, is an incredibly dangerous belief. And finally, the most controversial thing I think we need to engage a conversation about, definitely the most controversial, the one, in fact, my wife vehemently disagrees with me about, the Scandinavian countries are starting to play around with the idea of a basic income, giving people the income they need to exist, not to thrive, but to live a life where they're actually not fighting every day at a blue-collar job just to keep the lights on or their kids healthy. I'm not saying we need to go to this model. I'm saying it's time to engage in the debate about it. As I mentioned, it's one story among many. I'd love for you to participate with me. As I mentioned, I'm early on in stages of this, and I'm not sure where this theory takes me, but I'd like to invite you to come with me on it and to help me figure out if this is right or not, and if I am right, what we need to be doing now to worry about tomorrow starting today. Thank you.